At first glance, the shots of the iPhone 15 Pro Max look very similar to those of the iPhone 14 Pro or Pro Max. But there are differences in the cameras, which ones they are, if they are really relevant, and if you should rather go for the iPhone 15 Pro or Pro Max because of the camera. We will find out in this video. I have an iPhone 15 Pro Max here today that I'm comparing to a 14 Pro. The 14 Pro has the exact same cameras as the 14 Pro Max. To make it a little more exciting, there are 10 categories. If the upgrade and new features are really relevant and useful, the 15 Pro Max will get a point for that. I'm curious to see if the 15 Pro Max manages to score at least 5 points. But let's take an unbiased look at a few comparison shots to start with. The shots actually look very similar. I'll focus on video recordings, by the way, but the differences in the photos are very similar, and I'll also cover the main differences in the photo features. Even though the first shots look very similar, there is definitely one important new feature. The iPhone 15 Pro Max has received a completely new telephoto lens with a new focal length. Here you can see that the field of view, that is the focal length of the ultra-wide camera and the wide main camera, have not changed. Therefore, let's take a closer look at what impact the new telephoto lens has. The new 5x telephoto lens on the 15 Pro Max has a focal length of 120mm. And as you can see here, you can get much closer to subjects than with the 77mm of the 3x telephoto lens of the iPhone 14 Pro or even the normal 15 Pro. That's a big advantage, of course, because you can't compensate with the 15 Pro's digital zoom, which results in a significant loss in image quality. Don't forget that focal length doesn't just change the zoom factor, it changes the entire look of a shot. The background is more compressed at a higher focal length. This also makes a high focal length quite suitable for portraiture, partly because there is very little distortion. Actually, the high focal length of the telephoto lens of the 15 Pro Max also has two disadvantages compared to the telephoto lens of the iPhone 14 Pro. If you only want to zoom in up to 3x or 4x, but 5x would actually be too much, then the 14 Pro takes the better shots. That's because throughout the zoom range between 1x and 5x, the 15 Pro Max uses a digital crop, and that's inferior to the 14 Pro's 3x optical zoom. You can clearly see that here. And I said earlier that the telephoto lens is very well suited for portraiture, and you should use it for that as much as possible. But while the 3x lens of the 14 Pro was great for shooting a couple or small groups, the 5x zoom factor of the 15 Pro Max is a bit too extreme for that, and you'll have to go way back. Still, for me, the new telephoto lens is a great and important innovation. We'll take a closer look at the stabilization and low-light performance of this lens in a moment. 1 point for the 15 Pro Max. Color and contrast are among the most important quality features of a good video and photo recording, and the iPhone masters this excellently. The colors are nice, not too saturated, but very natural, and at the same time they are pleasantly rich in contrast. And here nothing has really changed at all, which is not fundamentally bad now, but colors, contrast and exposure of the two iPhone shots look more or less identical. The same goes for the skin tones, which also look very good. Except when it comes to really difficult lighting conditions, the image sometimes looks a bit unnatural. However, that is equally the case in both shots. No points for the iPhone 15 Pro Max. Dynamic range is about how well a camera can capture details in the very bright and very dark areas. The bright areas in particular burn out very quickly in difficult lighting conditions and no longer show any details. And even in very difficult lighting conditions, the performance of the two iPhones is identical. It is impossible to determine a winner here. Transitions between bright and dark are handled equally well. There is the same amount of detail in the very bright and dark areas of the image. Even in very extreme conditions, like this ride through the tunnel, you can't really tell the difference. Even though there is always talk of an improved camera, this at least does not apply to the dynamic range. This is also not a point for the 15 Pro Max. What about resolution and details? The highest resolution on the iPhone is still 4K, but can the 15 Pro Max still capture more details? I did a comparison here with the different lenses and then enlarged the shots a lot. With the 1x main camera, I can't see any noticeable difference in magnification. If anything, I'd say the shot from the 14 Pro looks a bit sharper. The shots from the ultra-wide lens look identical to me. Here you can see another magnification of a shot of the telephoto lens, which of course is not comparable in this context. And before you switch off board, it won't go on like this, because actually there are still some very surprising differences. But there is no point for the details. I was able to find two interesting differences with the cinematic mode. Here you can see a shot taken with the 1x main lens. The cinematic effect was set to the maximum, that is to f2, to make differences more noticeable. And Apple has visibly succeeded in improving edge detection and the effect. You can see it not only in the hair, but generally along the edges. The shot of the 15 Pro Max clearly looks better. Still not outstanding, but definitely better than the shot of the 14 Pro. As before, the edges look a bit blurry and artifacts can be seen, but Apple is on the right track. Unfortunately, there is also a negative surprise. While you can also use the cinematic mode on the 14 Pro with the telephoto lens, that is with 3x, this is not possible on the 15 Pro Max. Here, only 1x and 2x, so a cropped version of the main lens, can be selected in cinematic mode. And that is an important drawback, because the cinematic mode would be particularly suitable for cinematic close-ups of faces. Overall, the advantages and disadvantages of the cinematic mode cancel each other out for me. Thus, no points for the 15 Pro Max. Before we take a look at the performance in low light and the stabilization, we will listen to how the two iPhones sound in comparison, since the audio quality in particular is often neglected. And while we're comparing the audio quality of the two iPhones, I'd like to take the time to show you something. For many years now, many people have been switching from a consumer camera to a smartphone camera. And just a few years ago, photos from smartphone cameras weren't really good enough to print out in a large format. But fortunately, that time is now over. Especially the 48 megapixel main camera of the iPhone takes photos that are perfectly suitable for a large print. And if you're not only interested in viewing your photos on your smartphone, but also printing them in various ways, I have a very good provider for you, Saal Digital, which is also the sponsor of this video. This is a metal print of a photo of the iPhone 14 Pro. Here, the image was printed on an aluminum panel, and it looks great. A big advantage of this kind of printing is that the picture is practically not reflective at all. What absolutely surprised me is that the colors still look very strong and intense. And of course, Saal Digital offers printing not only on metal, but on a variety of surfaces. Saal Digital is known for a particularly high quality. This is also true for their beautiful photo books or the printing of high-quality posters. And for my viewers, I have a fantastic offer in the form of a 50% discount on all products. If I've piqued your interest, take a look at Saal Digital. You'll find a link in the video description. Even though the difference is not big, the 15 Pro Max sounds a bit louder and fuller, at least in the outdoor recordings. Here in the office, the 15 Pro Max sounded a bit clearer to me. There are also slight differences in the ambient noise. Nevertheless, this is not an additional point for me. Low light performance is very important for smartphone cameras, because you often want to take shots indoors and in difficult lighting conditions. And the performance in low light strongly depends on the respective lens. The best camera of the iPhone in low light is the 1x main camera. Here you can see a few comparison shots with the main camera. The main camera produces incredibly good shots in the dark for a smartphone. But I would have to lie if I claimed to see a decisive difference between the 15 Pro Max and the 14 Pro. It's a different story with the ultrawide lens. The ultrawide lens of the 15 Pro Max shows visibly less image noise, especially in very low light conditions. The images look better than those of the iPhone 14 Pro. The difference might not be huge, but it is clearly noticeable. And the same applies to the telephoto lens. The telephoto lens of the 15 Pro Max also produces better results than the telephoto lens of the 14 Pro in comparable lighting conditions. The shots look clearer and have less noise. This is important because the telephoto lens of the 14 Pro shows clear weaknesses in low light. Here you can also judge the difference in zoom factor. The performance in low light could be noticeably improved, especially with the weaker lenses. 1 point for the 15 Pro Max. The image stabilization also strongly depends on the camera or lens used. Generally, the wider the lens, the more stable the shot looks. This could therefore be a disadvantage for the new telephoto lens. But let's take a look at the comparison with the ultrawide lens first. This is the standard video mode, not the action mode. I've also added some artificial vibrations here. The shots are stabilized very well, with no visible difference between the 15 Pro Max and the 14 Pro. The same goes for the main camera. No difference can be seen here either. And a shot in action mode also looks identical on both iPhones. However, it is different with the telephoto lens. Apart from the fact that you should not walk around when taking shots with a telephoto lens, the difference is clear. The shot of the 14 Pro is very stable at 3x, while the shot of the 15 Pro Max looks very shaky at 5x. I would not have expected the difference to be so big, since Apple advertises the new telephoto lens to be particularly well stabilized. No point for the 15 Pro Max. If anything, that would be a point deduction. Unfortunately, the slow motion mode has not been improved either. Shots with 120 or 240 frames per second can still only be made in 1080, and the results do not look particularly good. especially at 240 frames per second, the image quality is very poor. Recordings in 4K at 120 frames per second should be possible without any problems. Apple finally has to improve this. There is also no point for the slow motion mode. What extra features does the 15 Pro Max have that the 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max do not? Most of the new features are related to the photo mode and not the video mode. There's the new 28mm and the new 35mm lens. Though of course, that's just a crop of the main camera. Due to the high resolution sensor, however, there is hardly any loss of quality. Both settings are not available in video mode. In the normal photo mode, faces are now not only recognized, but the portrait mode feature is also automatically displayed and will be used more often as a result. The portrait effect can also be applied afterwards once a face has been detected. That's a cool new feature, and there's a new 24 megapixel mode for a higher resolution, even without using RAW mode. If we think about printing photos, this is definitely a good innovation. Here in the magnification, you can see that the 24 megapixel photo of the 15 Pro Max has more details compared to the 12 megapixel photo of the 14 Pro. In video mode, you can now shoot in ProRes in 4K 60, but only if you connect an external storage. In ProRes, you also have the choice between HDR, SDR or log, which is a flat color profile. All in all, these are great new features. One clear point for it. And with that, the iPhone 15 Pro Max just barely gets 3 points. Of course, the most important innovation is the new telephoto lens. And if you can do without it, you get a nearly equivalent camera with the iPhone 14 Pro or Pro Max. What are you going to do? There will be an in-depth tutorial on the iPhone 15's camera features soon, so give me a like as feedback if you found the video interesting. Stay tuned and see you next time.